The ancient stone walls of Windsor Castle held countless secrets, but none weighed more heavily on Princess Catherine's mind than the mystery surrounding Captain James Blackwood. 10 years had passed since his funeral, a ceremony attended by the Queen herself, with full military honors befitting a royal guard who had given his life in service to the crown. Catherine had been only 18 then, a young woman sheltered from the harsh realities of royal security and the dangers faced by those sworn to protect her family. Now, at 28, Princess Catherine stood in the royal archives, her fingers trembling as she held a yellowed envelope that had arrived that morning through unofficial channels. The return address was from a small village in Scotland, and the handwriting was shaky, as though written by someone elderly or ill. Inside was a single piece of paper with words that had shattered her understanding of everything she thought she knew about Captain Blackwood's death. "Your Highness, the records you requested," said Margaret Thornberry, the castle's chief archivist, entering the dimly lit room with a stack of leather-bound files. Margaret had served the royal family for 40 years and knew better than to ask questions. When a member of the royal family requested sensitive documents, her discretion was legendary, which was precisely why Catherine had come to her. Catherine carefully set down the mysterious letter and accepted the files. "Thank you, Margaret. I need complete privacy for the next few hours. Please ensure no one disturbs me, regardless of who asks." Margaret's experienced eyes briefly flickered to the letter on the desk, but she simply nodded. "Of course, Your Highness. I'll be in the outer office if you need anything." She departed silently. Closing the heavy oak door behind her, Catherine opened the first file, which contained Captain Blackwood's official service record. James Blackwood had joined the Royal Guard at 22, following in his father's footsteps. His record was impeccable: commendations for bravery, perfect attendance, and numerous letters of praise from senior officers. The photographs showed a tall, stern-faced man with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see everything. He had been assigned specifically to her family's security. Detail: 5 years before his death, the official report stated that Captain Blackwood had died during a routine security sweep of the Scottish estate, where the royal family spent their summers. According to the documents, he had fallen from a cliff while investigating suspicious activity near the property's northern boundary. His body had been recovered 2 days later, and the coffin had been sealed immediately due to the severity of his injuries. The funeral had been swift, the burial private, except for the formal ceremony. Catherine remembered that day with painful clarity. She had stood in the rain, watching as the flag-draped coffin was lowered into the ground at the military cemetery. Her mother had placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering that brave men like Captain Blackwood deserved their tears. Catherine had cried, though she had never spoken more than a few formal words to the captain during his years of service. But now, this letter suggested something entirely different. Catherine picked it up again, reading the words that had haunted her since dawn. "Your Royal Highness, I am writing to you because my conscience will no longer allow me to remain silent. My name is Dr. Robert Morrison, and 10 years ago, I was the physician who examined Captain James Blackwood's body before it was released for burial. I was instructed to sign the death certificate without performing a thorough examination, and I was told this order came from the highest levels of security. At the time, I was young and frightened, and I obeyed. But I have lived with this decision for a decade, and now, as I face my own mortality, I must tell someone the truth. Captain Blackwood's injuries were not consistent with a fall from a cliff. The wounds I saw suggested something far more deliberate and violent. I believe the circumstances of his death were deliberately concealed. I pray you will investigate what truly happened to that good man." Catherine's hands shook as she set the letter down. Dr. Morrison had included his current address and phone number, along with a note stating that he was terminally ill and had perhaps 3 months to live. He claimed he had nothing to lose by revealing the truth now. The implications were staggering. If Captain Blackwood's death had been covered up, it meant that someone within the royal security apparatus, perhaps someone still serving, had been involved in either his death or the subsequent deception. It raised questions about why he had been killed and what he might have discovered that made him a threat. Catherine spent the next 3 hours reading through every document in the files. She found incident reports, security assessments, and personnel evaluations. Most were routine and unremarkable, but then she discovered something that made her pause. 3 weeks before his death, Captain Blackwood had submitted a confidential memo requesting a private meeting with the head of royal security. The subject line read, "Urgent security concerns, eyes only." There was no record of whether that meeting had ever taken place. More troublingly, there was no copy of the memo itself, only a reference to it in a filing index. Someone had removed the actual document from the archives. Catherine's mind raced with possibilities. Had Captain Blackwood discovered something dangerous? Had he been killed to silence him? And if so, who had orchestrated it, and why? She thought back to that summer 10 years ago, trying to remember anything unusual. The family had been at Balmoral, their Scottish estate, enjoying what should have been a peaceful holiday. Security had seemed normal, perhaps even routine. She remembered Captain Blackwood walking the grounds. Always vigilant, always professional. He had been part of the landscape, so constant that she had barely noticed him, but now, looking at his photograph in the file, She saw something she had missed before. In one candid shot taken during a garden party, Captain Blackwood stood in the background, and his expression was troubled. His eyes were fixed on something, or someone outside the frame, and his jaw was set in a way that suggested tension or concern. Catherine pulled out her phone and called a number she had memorized but rarely used. It belonged to Sir Edmund Price, who had been the head of royal security during her childhood and was now retired. If anyone might remember the truth about Captain Blackwood, it would be Sir Edmund. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Price speaking. Sir Edmund, this is Catherine. I need to speak with you urgently about a matter from 10 years ago. It concerns Captain James Blackwood. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Sir Edmund finally spoke, his voice had changed, becoming guarded and careful. Your Highness, that's a subject best left in the past. Captain Blackwood died in the line of duty. There's nothing more to discuss. I've received information suggesting otherwise, Catherine said firmly. I need to know the truth, Sir Edmund. I need to know what really happened to him. Another long pause. Your Highness, I cannot discuss this over the phone. If you insist on pursuing this matter, we must meet in person, and it must be somewhere completely private. What you're asking about involves matters of national security. Catherine felt her pulse quicken. Sir Edmund's response confirmed her suspicions. There was indeed something hidden about Captain Blackwood's death. I can come to your home this evening. Would 8 o'clock be suitable? No, not my home. Meet me at the old gamekeeper's cottage on the Windsor estate, the one near the eastern woods. Come alone, and tell no one where you're going. If you're serious about learning the truth, you must understand that some truths are dangerous. The line went dead before Catherine could respond. She sat in the silent archive room, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She was about to step into something far larger and more dangerous than she had imagined, but she couldn't turn back now. Captain Blackwood had served her family faithfully, and if his death had been covered up, he deserved justice. Catherine gathered the files and returned them to Margaret, who accepted them without comment. As she walked through the castle corridors back to her private apartments, Catherine made a decision. Before meeting Sir Edmund, she needed to speak with Dr. Morrison and hear his full account. Catherine returned to her private quarters and immediately placed a call to the number Dr. Morrison had provided. The phone rang several times before a weak, raspy voice answered. Morrison residence. Dr. Morrison, this is Princess Catherine. I received your letter this morning, and I need to hear everything you can tell me about Captain Blackwood's death. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Your Highness, I wasn't certain you would contact me. I'm relieved you did. What I have to say has weighed on my conscience for far too long. Please, tell me everything from the beginning, Catherine urged, settling into a chair by the window, overlooking the castle gardens. Dr. Morrison's voice wavered with emotion as he began his account. I was 32 years old when I was called to examine Captain Blackwood's body. I had been practicing medicine in Edinburgh for 6 years, and had recently been added to the list of physicians approved for sensitive royal matters. When the call came at 3 in the morning, I was told only that there had been a death at the royal estate and that my immediate presence was required. He paused to catch his breath before continuing. When I arrived at the estate's medical facility, 2 men in dark suits were waiting. They never identified themselves, but they carried themselves like intelligence officers. They told me that Captain Blackwood had fallen from a cliff during a security patrol and that I needed to examine the body and sign a death certificate quickly and quietly. Catherine gripped the phone tighter. What did you see when you examined him? That's what has haunted me all these years, Your Highness. The body had injuries, certainly, but they were inconsistent with a fall. Captain Blackwood had 3 distinct wounds to his torso that looked like knife wounds, though they had been partially obscured by what appeared to be deliberate damage inflicted after death. His hands showed defensive injuries, cuts and bruising that suggested he had fought with someone before he died. Catherine felt her stomach turn. You're saying he was murdered? I'm saying the evidence I saw suggested a violent confrontation, not an accidental fall. But when I tried to note these observations in my preliminary report, one of the men stopped me. He said that for reasons of national security, the official cause of death must be listed as accidental trauma from a fall. He implied that asking questions or failing to cooperate would have serious consequences for my career and possibly for my safety. And you simply agreed? Catherine asked, trying to keep judgment from her voice. Dr. Morrison's response was filled with shame and regret. I was terrified, Your Highness. I had a young wife and a baby daughter. The men made it clear that cooperation was not optional. I signed the certificate they wanted, and I was paid a substantial sum that was described as compensation for my discretion. I deposited the money and tried to forget what I had seen. But you cannot forget such things, not really. Catherine stood and began pacing. Why are you coming forward now, after all these years? I have terminal lung cancer, Your Highness. The doctors give me 3 months, at most. I'm not afraid of those men anymore because they cannot threaten me with anything worse than what I'm already facing. But more than that, I've thought about Captain Blackwood every day for 10 years. He was someone's son, perhaps someone's brother or father. He deserved better than to be murdered and have his death covered up as an accident. I cannot meet my maker with this lie on my conscience. Catherine sat back down, her mind processing everything she had heard. Dr. Morrison, would you be willing to put all of this in a sworn statement? Something that could be used as evidence. I've already prepared one, Your Highness. It's with my solicitor, along with instructions to release it to you if anything should happen to me before we can meet. I also kept my original notes from that night, the ones I wrote before those men told me what to write instead. They're not in my home because I feared they might be found, but I can retrieve them if you need them. I need them, Catherine said firmly, and I need you to stay safe until we can sort this out properly. Are you well enough to travel? Barely, but I would make the effort if necessary. Then I'm going to arrange for you to be brought to a secure location where we can meet. I need to hear your complete account in person, and I need those original notes. Can you be ready to travel tomorrow? Dr. Morrison agreed, and Catherine promised to send secure transportation for him the following morning. After ending the call, she sat in silence, staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens where tourists walked and photographed the castle, completely unaware of the dark secrets hidden within its walls. Catherine's next call was to someone she trusted absolutely. Her former bodyguard, Commander Sarah Bennett, who had retired from royal service 2 years earlier to start a private security consulting firm. Sarah had protected Catherine throughout her teenage years and early 20s, and their relationship had evolved into genuine friendship built on mutual respect and trust. Sarah, I need your help with something serious and potentially dangerous, Catherine said when Sarah answered. I'm listening, Sarah replied, her voice immediately alert and focused. Catherine explained everything, Dr. Morrison's letter, the inconsistencies in the official record, and Sir Edmund's cryptic warning about national security. Sarah listened without interruption, her military training evident in her measured response when Catherine finished. Catherine, what you're describing sounds like a sanctioned elimination that was covered up at the highest levels. If Captain Blackwood discovered something that threatened powerful people or exposed a security breach, they might have decided he was too dangerous to leave alive. But who would make such a decision? And what could he have possibly discovered that would warrant murder? Sarah was quiet for a moment. I wasn't on your security detail 10 years ago, but I remember hearing rumors about something happening at Balmoral that summer. The official story was that it was just a tragic accident. But some of the guards whispered that Blackwood had been investigating something, that he had suspected someone on the inside was compromised. Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. Compromised how? The rumors suggested he thought someone in the Royal Protection Detail was feeding information to outside parties. In intelligence terms, that would make them a security risk of the highest order. If Blackwood was close to identifying a mole within the palace security, that person would have had every reason to silence him. And if that person is still in place, double quotes, Catherine began, then you're in danger by investigating this, Sarah finished. Catherine, you need to be extremely careful about who you trust. If there was a mole 10 years ago, and they were never caught, they could still be active. Your investigation could make you a target. Catherine stood and walked to her window, looking down at the guards patrolling below. I have to meet with Sir Edmund tonight at the old gamekeeper's cottage. He insisted I come alone. Absolutely not, Sarah said firmly. If Sir Edmund was head of security when Blackwood died, he either knows what happened or was involved in covering it up. Meeting him alone could be a trap. He might also be the only person who can tell me the truth, Catherine countered. Sir Edmund served my family loyally for 30 years. I have to believe he wouldn't harm me. Loyalty can be complicated when national security is involved, Sarah warned. People do terrible things when they believe they're protecting something larger than individual lives. At minimum, let me be there, hidden nearby. If anything goes wrong, you'll need backup. Catherine considered this carefully. All right, but stay completely out of sight. If Sir Edmund sees you, he might not talk. They arranged the details for the evening meeting. Sarah would arrive at the cottage an hour early to scout the location and position herself, where she could observe without being detected. Catherine would arrive exactly at 8 o'clock as agreed. The gamekeeper's cottage sat on the edge of the Windsor estate, surrounded by dense oak trees that blocked most of the fading evening light. Catherine had visited this place only once before. Years ago, during a childhood adventure when she had wandered too far from the main grounds, the cottage had seemed mysterious and slightly frightening then, and as she approached it now in the growing darkness, that feeling returned with unexpected intensity. She had dressed in dark, practical clothing and had driven herself in an unmarked car from the palace garage, taking care to avoid the routes monitored by security cameras. Sarah had texted her an hour ago to confirm she was in position, hidden in the tree line with a clear view of the cottage entrance. The knowledge that her friend was nearby provided some comfort. Though Catherine's heart still raced with nervous anticipation, the cottage door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling out onto the overgrown path. Catherine paused at the threshold, listening. She could hear movement inside, the sound of someone pacing on wooden floorboards. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. Sir Edmund Price stood by a small fireplace, his back to her. He had aged considerably since his retirement, his once military posture now slightly stooped, his hair completely white. When he turned to face her, Catherine was struck by the exhaustion in his eyes, as though he carried a burden too heavy to bear. Your Highness, he said formally, gesturing to a worn armchair near the fire. Please, sit down. What I have to tell you is not a story one tells standing up. Catherine sat, keeping her phone within easy reach in case she needed to signal Sarah. I'm listening, Sir Edmund. I want to know everything about Captain Blackwood's death. Sir Edmund poured himself a glass of whiskey from a bottle on the mantel, his hand shaking slightly. Before I begin, you must understand something. Everything that was done to protect the crown, to protect your family, and to protect the nation. Right or wrong, that was always the intention. That sounds like the beginning of a confession, Catherine observed quietly. Perhaps it is. Sir Edmund took a long drink before continuing. Captain James Blackwood was one of the finest guards I ever commanded. He was intelligent, observant, and utterly devoted to his duty. Those qualities made him an exceptional protector, but they also made him dangerous when he began to see things that others wanted kept hidden. What did he see? Catherine leaned forward, her attention completely focused. Sir Edmund moved to the window, gazing out into the darkness. For months before his death, Captain Blackwood came to me with concerns about another member of the protection detail, a man named Lieutenant Marcus Webb. Blackwood had noticed irregularities in Webb's behavior, unexplained absences during shifts, encrypted communications that went through unofficial channels. He suspected Webb was compromised, possibly working as an intelligence asset for a foreign power. Catherine felt her breath catch. A spy, within the Royal Protection Service. That was Blackwood's theory, and I'm ashamed to say, I initially dismissed it. Webb came from an excellent family, had an impeccable service record, and had been thoroughly vetted. I told Blackwood he was being paranoid, that the stress of constant vigilance was making him see threats where none existed. Sir Edmund's voice grew heavy with regret, but Blackwood wouldn't let it go. He began conducting his own investigation, watching Webb, documenting suspicious activities, building a case. And you let him? Catherine asked. I didn't know the full extent of what he was doing until it was too late. Blackwood was discreet, keeping his investigation quiet because he didn't know who else might be involved. But 3 weeks before the family's summer trip to Balmoral, he came to me again. This time, he had evidence. Photographs of Webb meeting with a known intelligence operative from a hostile nation, records of classified information that had been leaked, a pattern of security breaches that all traced back to Webb's duty shifts. Sir Edmund turned back to face Catherine, and she saw tears glistening in his eyes. I realized then that Blackwood was right, and that the situation was far more serious than I had imagined. If Webb was indeed a foreign agent, it meant that every member of the royal family had been vulnerable for years. It meant that state secrets had been compromised. It meant that my own failure to listen to Blackwood earlier had put the nation at risk. What did you do? Catherine asked, though she was beginning to understand where this story was leading. I did what I was trained to do. I reported Blackwood's findings up the chain of command, to the intelligence services and the Home Office. I expected immediate action, an arrest, an investigation. Instead, I was told to stand down and keep quiet. I was informed that Webb was actually working for British intelligence, that he was a double agent who had been feeding false information to the hostile power while gathering intelligence in return. His meetings and communications were all part of an authorized operation that had been ongoing for 3 years. Catherine stood abruptly. So Blackwood's investigation threatened to expose a valuable intelligence operation? Exactly. And there's where the tragedy began to unfold. I was ordered to inform Blackwood that his concerns had been addressed, that Webb had been investigated and cleared, and that the matter was closed. I was explicitly forbidden from telling Blackwood the truth about Webb's actual role. It was a matter of operational security, they said. The fewer people who knew about Webb's real work, the safer the operation would be. Sir Edmund sat down heavily in the other chair, but Blackwood didn't believe me. He could tell I was hiding something, and he continued his investigation. During the summer at Balmoral, he confronted Webb directly, accused him of being a traitor, and threatened to go public with his evidence if I didn't take action. Catherine sank back into her chair, her mind racing to piece together the implications. Webb killed him. Webb contacted his handlers in the intelligence service, panicking that his cover was about to be blown, and those handlers made a decision. Sir Edmund's voice dropped to barely a whisper. They decided that the intelligence operation was too valuable to lose. That Webb's position gave them access to information that was critical to national security, and they decided that Captain James Blackwood had become a liability that needed to be eliminated. The words hung in the air between them like poison. Catherine felt physically sick as she processed what Sir Edmund was telling her. Our own government murdered one of our guards? Not our government, Your Highness. A small group of intelligence officials who believed they were making an impossible choice for the greater good. They sent an operative to Balmoral under the guise of additional security for the royal visit. That operative staged an encounter with Blackwood during his night patrol, killed him, and made it look like an accident. I was informed after the fact and told that the official story about the cliff fall would be maintained. I was told that questioning this decision would mean the end of my career, and possibly criminal charges for interfering with a sanctioned intelligence operation. Catherine stood and walked to the window. needing to move, needing to process this horrifying revelation. And you said nothing. You let them bury him with honors, while knowing he had been murdered by the very government he served. I convinced myself I was protecting the crown, Sir Edmund said, his voice breaking. I told myself that if the truth came out, it would create a scandal that would damage the monarchy and the nation's security apparatus. I told myself that Blackwood's sacrifice, however unwilling, was serving a greater purpose. But the truth is simpler and more cowardly than that. I was afraid of losing my position, afraid of what they might do to silence me if I spoke up, afraid of facing the consequences of my own earlier failure to take Blackwood's concerns seriously. Catherine turned to face him, anger and disgust, warring with pity for the broken old man before her, who specifically gave the order, "I need names." Sir Edmund reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, his hands trembling as he handed it to Catherine. The operation was authorized by Sir Anthony Hartwell, who was then Deputy Director of MI6. The actual operative who carried out the killing was never named to me, but the coordination went through a man named Colin Driscoll, who ran covert operations at the time. Both men are still alive, both still connected to the intelligence community. Though officially retired, Catherine unfolded the paper to find 2 names written in Sir Edmund's shaky handwriting, along with current addresses and phone numbers. You've been carrying this information all these years. I wrote it down 5 years ago when I first started having chest pains and thought I might die. I couldn't bear the thought of taking this secret to my grave without at least documenting the truth. But I was too much of a coward to do anything with it until you called me today. Sir Edmund stood and walked to a small desk in the corner, retrieving a thick envelope. This contains everything I know about the operation, including copies of the classified memos I received and my own contemporaneous notes from that time. I should have given this to someone years ago. Catherine took the envelope, feeling its weight both physical and metaphorical. What happened to Lieutenant Webb after Blackwood's death? Webb continued his work for another 2 years before his operation was concluded. He was quietly reassigned to a different position, given a new identity through the Witness Protection Program, and pensioned off with honors for his service to the Crown. As far as I know, he's living comfortably somewhere in the countryside under an assumed name, while Captain Blackwood rots in his grave, remembered as a man who died in an unfortunate accident. The bitterness in Sir Edmund's voice was palpable. Catherine studied the old man's face and saw the toll that 10 years of guilt had taken. Why didn't Webb just tell Blackwood the truth? If he was working for our side, surely they could have brought Blackwood into the secret. That was my question as well, Sir Edmund replied. The answer I received was that Blackwood's personality profile suggested he would not accept the deception required for Webb's role. Blackwood was a man of absolute principles. You see, black and white, right and wrong, with no room for the moral ambiguities that intelligence work requires. They believed that if Blackwood knew Webb was a double agent, he would either refuse to keep the secret or would treat Webb with suspicion that might give away his true allegiance to the hostile power. In their calculation, it was safer to eliminate Blackwood than to risk compromising years of intelligence work. Catherine felt rage building inside her. They calculated wrong. They murdered a loyal servant of the Crown and covered it up, and in doing so, they committed the very betrayal they claimed to be preventing. Yes, sir, Edmund agreed simply. They did. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Everything okay? You've been in there 45 minutes. She quickly typed back, fine. Getting crucial information. Stand by. Turning back to Sir Edmund, Catherine asked the question that had been building since Dr. Morrison's letter arrived. The coffin was sealed immediately after the body was examined. That was deliberate, wasn't it? To prevent anyone from seeing the real injuries. Yes, the intelligence service arranged everything. They brought in Dr. Morrison because he was young and could be intimidated. They controlled who had access to the body, how it was prepared, and how quickly it was buried. The sealed coffin was explained as necessary due to the severity of the injuries. But the real reason was to ensure no one could ever examine the evidence of how Blackwood actually died. Catherine made a decision that had been forming since the conversation began. I'm going to have the coffin I'm going to have an independent pathologist examine the remains, and I'm going to expose everyone involved in this cover-up. Sir Edmund's face went pale. Your Highness, you must think carefully about this. The people involved are powerful and dangerous. They've already killed once to protect their secrets. Sir Anthony Hartwell still has connections throughout the intelligence community. If you move against him, you could be putting yourself at enormous risk. I don't care, Catherine said firmly. Captain Blackwood deserves justice. His family deserves the truth. And the people who ordered his murder deserve to face consequences for what they did. There's another consideration, Sir Edmund said quietly. If you expose this, you'll create a scandal that could damage the monarchy itself. The public will ask how a royal guard could be murdered, and the royal family not know about it. They'll question the integrity of the protection service, the trustworthiness of the intelligence agencies, and the competence of the government. Some will use this to argue for abolishing the monarchy altogether. Catherine had already considered this point. The monarchy doesn't deserve protection if it's built on covering up murder. My family's safety doesn't justify letting good men be killed and their deaths covered up. If exposing the truth damages the institution, then perhaps the institution needs to be damaged. Sir Edmund looked at her with a mixture of admiration and fear. You sound like your grandmother did when she was young, before years of compromise and political reality wore her down. I hope you can maintain that integrity, Your Highness. I truly do. What will you do now? Catherine asked. Will you testify to what you've told me? If you need me to, I will. I'm 73 years old with a weak heart. I have nothing left to lose except my peace of mind, and I lost that 10 years ago. Testifying might actually give me some small measure of redemption before I die. Catherine stood and walked to the door, then paused and turned back. Sir Edmund, I have one more question. Did my grandmother know? Did the Queen know that Captain Blackwood was murdered? The old man was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, Catherine found her answer. She was briefed by the intelligence service after the fact. She was told that a difficult decision had been made for reasons of national security, and that it was in everyone's best interest if the official story was maintained. She was assured that proper justice had been served in ways that could not be made public. Catherine felt as though she had been struck. Her grandmother, whom she loved and respected, had known about this murder, and had chosen to remain silent. The woman who had taught her about duty and honor had been complicit in covering up the death of one of her own guards. Did she agree with the decision? Catherine asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. She was troubled by it, I know that much. But she ultimately accepted the judgment of the intelligence services that the Operation Webb was involved in was too important to risk. She chose the security of the nation over justice for one man. Whether that was the right choice is not for me to say. Catherine opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air, needing to breathe, needing to clear her head. Behind her, Sir Edmund called out softly, Your Highness, be very careful. You're about to challenge people who have everything to lose. They won't hesitate to protect themselves. Catherine didn't respond. She walked quickly down the path to where she had parked her car, her mind racing with everything she had learned. Sarah emerged from the trees, falling into step beside her. Did you hear all of that? Catherine asked. Most of it, Sarah confirmed. I had a directional microphone pointed at the window. Catherine, this is bigger than I thought. If you're serious about pursuing this, we need to be extremely strategic about how we proceed. They reached Catherine's car, and both women got inside before continuing the conversation. I need to speak with Dr. Morrison tomorrow and get a sworn statement, Catherine said. Then I need to arrange for the exhumation of Captain Blackwood's coffin. That's the physical evidence we need. Exhumation requires official approval. Sarah pointed out, you'll need to go through proper legal channels, which means involving lawyers. Possibly courts? Definitely leaving a paper trail that will alert exactly the people you're investigating. Catherine spent the night in her private apartments, unable to sleep, reviewing every document Sir Edmund had given her. The papers painted a picture of institutional corruption and moral compromise that made her question everything she had been taught about duty and service. By dawn, she had made several crucial decisions about how to proceed. Her first call was to Thomas Blackwood, Captain James Blackwood's younger brother, who still lived in the family's hometown in Yorkshire. Catherine had discovered his contact information in the archived files, along with the notation that he had been the one to receive his brother's personal effects after the funeral. The phone rang 6 times before a cautious male voice answered. Mr. Blackwood, my name is Catherine. I'm calling about your brother James. I believe you deserve to know the truth about how he died. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Who is this really? Is this some kind of cruel joke? I'm Princess Catherine, and I assure you this is not a joke. Your brother served my family faithfully, and I've recently learned that the official account of his death was a lie. I want to investigate what really happened to him, but I need your permission and your cooperation. Thomas Blackwood was silent for nearly a minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I never believed that story about him falling from a cliff. James was an experienced climber, an expert in outdoor survival. He wouldn't have made such a careless mistake. But when I tried to ask questions, I was shut down by military officials who told me the investigation was closed and that pushing further would dishonor my brother's memory. They lied to you, Catherine said gently. Your brother discovered something that powerful people wanted, kept secret, and he was killed to silence him. I have evidence, and I have witnesses who are willing to testify. But to prove what happened, I need to have his body exhumed and examined by an independent pathologist. You want to dig up my brother's grave? Thomas's voice wavered between hope and horror. I know it's a difficult request, but it's the only way to prove that his injuries weren't consistent with an accidental fall. The pathologist who first examined him was coerced into signing a false death certificate. A proper examination will show the truth about how your brother died. Thomas was quiet again, and Catherine could hear him breathing heavily, struggling with the decision. If you're right, if James was murdered, then I want the people responsible brought to justice. I've spent 10 years wondering what really happened. 10 years feeling like I failed him by not pushing harder for answers. If opening his coffin will give us the truth, then yes, you have my permission. Catherine felt relief wash over her. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I promise you that I will see this through, no matter what it costs me personally. Your brother deserves justice. After ending the call, Catherine contacted her personal lawyer, Richard Pemberton. one of the few people she trusted absolutely. Richard had served her family for 20 years and had a reputation for absolute discretion and unwavering ethical standards. When she explained what she needed, his response was immediate and concerned. Your Highness, what you're describing amounts to accusing senior intelligence officials of murder and conspiracy. The legal and political ramifications will be enormous. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed down this path? I've never been more certain of anything, Catherine replied. Can you arrange for the exhumation order? As next of kin, Mr. Blackwood can petition for exhumation, and given the circumstances you've described, I believe we can make a compelling case to a judge. However, once we file the petition, it becomes a matter of public record. The people you're investigating will know immediately what you're doing. Let them know, Catherine said firmly. I'm done with secrets and shadows. We do this publicly, legally, and properly. I want everything documented and transparent. Richard agreed to begin the legal process immediately, and by Catherine was on her way to Scotland to meet with Dr. Morrison. She had arranged for a private medical transport to bring him to a secure location, but the elderly doctor had insisted on meeting her at his own home, saying he was too weak to travel and that if he was going to make his statement, it should be from the place where he had lived with his guilt for a decade. Dr. Morrison's cottage was in a small village north of Edinburgh, a picturesque stone house overlooking rolling hills. When Catherine arrived with Sarah accompanying her, the doctor was waiting on his porch, wrapped in blankets despite the mild weather. He looked even more frail than Catherine had imagined, his skin gray and his breathing labored. Your Highness, he said, attempting to stand as she approached. Forgive me for not rising properly. The cancer has spread to my bones, and movement has become difficult. Please, don't trouble yourself, Catherine said, taking a seat beside him. I'm grateful that you're willing to speak with me at all. What you're doing takes tremendous courage. Dr. Morrison smiled weakly. Courage would have been speaking up 10 years ago. This is merely an old man trying to clear his conscience before he faces whatever judgment awaits him. I've prepared a detailed written statement, and I've brought out my original notes from the examination. They're inside, along with photographs I took before those men stopped me. Catherine felt her pulse quicken. You took photographs, 3 of them, on my personal camera before they confiscated it. But I had already uploaded the images to my computer using a cable connection. When they took my camera, they didn't think to check my laptop. I've kept those photos hidden for 10 years, too afraid to do anything with them but too guilty to destroy them. Sarah went inside to retrieve the documents and photos, while Catherine stayed with Dr. Morrison. The old man looked out over the hills and spoke quietly. I've thought many times about what I should have done differently that night. I could have refused to sign the false certificate. I could have gone to the media. I could have contacted members of Parliament or the royal family directly. But I was young and scared, and I convinced myself that I was just one small person caught up in something too big for me to influence. You were threatened and intimidated by people who abused their power, Catherine said. The blame lies with them, not with you. Perhaps, but we all make choices, Your Highness. I chose security over integrity, and that choice has defined the last decade of my life. I hope my statement now can make some small difference, though it comes far too late for Captain Blackwood. Sarah emerged from the house, carrying a folder and a laptop computer. Her face was grim as she showed Catherine the photographs on the screen. The images showed Captain Blackwood's body on an examination table, and even Catherine's untrained eye could see what Dr. Morrison had described. 3 distinct puncture wounds in the torso, defensive wounds on the hands and forearms, and bruising patterns inconsistent with a fall. These photographs will be powerful evidence, Sarah said. Combined with Dr. Morrison's statement and Sir Edmund's documentation, you'll have enough to force an official investigation. Catherine spent the next 2 hours recording Dr. Morrison's detailed account on video, with Richard Pemberton participating via video call to ensure the statement would be legally admissible. Dr. Morrison described every detail of that night, from his arrival at the estate to the threats made by the intelligence officers, to his decision to comply with their demands. His testimony was damning and specific, naming the 2 men who had coerced him and describing their explicit instructions to falsify the death certificate. When the recording was complete, Dr. Morrison seemed to deflate with exhaustion, but also relief. Thank you for listening, Your Highness. Whatever happens now, at least the truth will be on record. Catherine took his hand gently. You've done the right thing, Dr. Morrison. Captain Blackwood's family will finally know what happened to him because of your courage. As Catherine and Sarah prepared to leave, Dr. Morrison called out to them one more time. Your Highness, be careful. The men who did this have spent 10 years believing they got away with it. They won't surrender quietly when confronted with the truth. They'll fight to protect themselves, and they have resources you can't imagine. Catherine nodded solemnly. I understand the risks, but some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. The drive back to London took 6 hours, during which Catherine and Sarah discussed strategy for what would come next. Richard had already filed the exhumation petition with detailed affidavits from both Thomas Blackwood and Dr. Morrison. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later, and Richard was confident the judge would grant the order given the evidence of irregularities in the original death investigation. Once the exhumation order is granted, we'll need an independent pathologist, Sarah said. Someone with impeccable credentials who can't be intimidated or bought off. Catherine had already thought of someone, Dr. Helena Price, Britain's most respected forensic pathologist, who had testified in numerous high-profile cases and had a reputation for fearless independence. She was also someone Catherine had met at charity events and who had expressed admiration for Catherine's advocacy work on medical ethics. That evening, Catherine received an unexpected visitor at her private apartments. Margaret Thornberry, the royal archivist, arrived with another file folder, her expression troubled. "Your Highness, I shouldn't be doing this, but I believe you need to see these documents. After you requested Captain Blackwood's file, I continued looking through the archives from that period. I found these hidden in a mislabeled box in the restricted section." Catherine opened the folder to find Captain Blackwood's original security reports from the weeks before his death, the ones that should have been in his main file but had been removed. The reports detailed his surveillance of Lieutenant Webb, including dates, times, and descriptions of suspicious meetings. The final report, dated 2 days before Blackwood's death, stated explicitly, "Have conclusive evidence that LT Webb is compromised. Request immediate emergency meeting with Director. Situation critical." "This proves he knew," Catherine said quietly. He had figured out that Webb was passing information to foreign contacts, and he was about to expose it. Margaret nodded. "There's one more thing, Your Highness. That report was logged into the archive system, which means someone in the royal household received it and read it before Blackwood died. The access log shows it was viewed by 3 people, Sir Edmund Price, as expected, the duty officer that day, and one other person." She pointed to the third name on the access log, and Catherine felt her blood run cold. The report had been accessed by Lord Christopher Ashford, who was then and still was the Queen's private secretary, one of the most powerful positions in the royal household. If Lord Ashford had known about Blackwood's discovery, it meant the conspiracy reached even deeper into the palace than Catherine had imagined. Catherine stood in her apartment staring at Lord Christopher Ashford's name on the access log, her mind racing through the implications. Lord Ashford had been her grandmother's most trusted advisor for over 2 decades. He attended every important meeting, reviewed every sensitive document, and had the Queen's complete confidence. If he had seen Blackwood's final report before the captain's death and done nothing to protect him, it meant the cover-up reached the very heart of the royal household. Sarah studied the document over Catherine's shoulder and let out a low whistle. "This changes everything. If Lord Ashford knew what Blackwood had discovered and failed to act, he's complicit in what happened. He may have even facilitated it by keeping the information from reaching people who might have helped." Catherine's phone rang, and she saw Richard Pemberton's name on the screen. She answered immediately, hoping for good news about the exhumation petition. "Your Highness, we have a problem," Richard said without preamble. "I just received a call from the Attorney General's office. They're filing an emergency motion to block the exhumation on grounds of national security. They claim that disturbing Captain Blackwood's remains could compromise ongoing intelligence operations and damage relationships with allied nations." Catherine felt anger surge through her. That's absurd. What intelligence operation could possibly be compromised by examining a body that's been buried for 10 years? "It's a delaying tactic," Richard explained. "They're trying to tie this up in legal proceedings long enough to figure out how to contain the situation. The hearing on their motion is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I'll fight it, but you should know that national security claims carry significant weight with judges, especially when they come from the Attorney General himself." After ending the call, Catherine made a decision that would prove either brilliant or disastrous. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had been given years ago with instructions to use only in emergencies. It was the private line for James Mitchell, an investigative journalist who had built his career exposing government corruption and had won multiple awards for his fearless reporting. Catherine had met him at a press function 3 years earlier and had been impressed by his integrity and his refusal to be intimidated by powerful people. Mitchell answered on the second ring. "This is James Mitchell." "Mr. Mitchell, this is Princess Catherine. I have a story for you about government-sanctioned murder and a decade-long cover-up involving British intelligence services. Are you interested?" There was a brief pause. Then Mitchell's voice came back sharp and focused. "I'm listening very carefully, Your Highness." Catherine spent the next hour telling Mitchell everything she had learned, from Dr. Morrison's letter to Sir Edmund's confession to the documents showing Lord Ashford's knowledge of Blackwood's investigation. She sent him copies of all the evidence she had gathered, including the photographs Dr. Morrison had taken and the access logs from the royal archives. "This is explosive," Mitchell said when she finished. "If I publish this story, it will create a firestorm. The intelligence services will deny everything, and they'll come after both of us with everything they have. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared to see justice done for Captain Blackwood," Catherine replied firmly. "And I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from that. Can you have the story ready to publish tomorrow evening?" "I can have it ready by midnight tonight if necessary," Mitchell assured her. "But Your Highness, you should understand that once this goes public, there's no taking it back. Your relationship with the government, with the intelligence services, possibly even with your own family, will be forever changed. I understand, Catherine said quietly. Publish the story tomorrow at 6 in the evening, after the hearing on the exhumation motion. That way the judge will have made his ruling based on the legal merits rather than public pressure, and the government won't be able to bury the story before it gets out. The next morning, Catherine arrived at the Royal Courts of Justice with Richard Pemberton and Thomas Blackwood, who had traveled down from Yorkshire overnight. The courtroom was surprisingly crowded, with government lawyers occupying one entire side and several men in dark suits sitting in the gallery whom Catherine recognized as intelligence officials. The government's argument was presented by the Attorney General himself, Sir Malcolm Hendricks, a silver-haired man with a reputation for never losing a case. He stood before the judge and painted a picture of grave national security risks that would result from exhuming Captain Blackwood's body. Your Honor, the deceased was involved in highly sensitive security matters relating to ongoing intelligence operations. Sir Malcolm argued, while we cannot disclose the specific details in open court, I can assure you that disturbing his remains at this time would compromise active investigations and damage our relationships with Allied intelligence services. The national interest demands that this petition be denied. Richard Pemberton rose to respond, his voice calm but forceful. Your Honor, the government's argument is nothing more than a smokescreen designed to prevent the truth from emerging about a possible murder. We have evidence from a qualified physician suggesting that Captain Blackwood's injuries were inconsistent with the official cause of death. We have testimony from former security officials indicating a cover-up, and we have the right of the deceased family to know how their loved one truly died. National security cannot be used as a blanket excuse to hide potential crimes. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Eleanor Price, who is known for her no-nonsense approach to legal arguments, listened carefully to both sides before speaking. Sir Malcolm, I'm troubled by your vague references to national security, without any specific explanation of how an exhumation could cause harm. This man has been dead for 10 years. What possible ongoing operation could be compromised by examining his remains? Sir Malcolm shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, I must respectfully request an in-camera session where I can provide classified details that cannot be shared in open court. Justice Price frowned. I'm not inclined to grant that request without more substantial justification. However, I will take the matter under advisement and issue my ruling by the end of the day. The hearing ended, and Catherine left the courthouse surrounded by reporters who had somehow learned about the case. She refused to answer their questions, but she could see the curiosity and speculation in their eyes. By the end of the day, even without Mitchell's story, rumors would be spreading about what the case was really about. That afternoon, while waiting for the judge's decision, Catherine received an unexpected visitor at her private office in the palace. Lord Christopher Ashford requested an urgent meeting, and despite her anger at his possible involvement, Catherine agreed to see him. Knowledge was power, and she wanted to hear what he had to say. Lord Ashford entered the office looking older than his 65 years. His usually immaculate appearance, slightly disheveled. He sat down heavily without waiting for permission, which was itself unusual given his typically perfect protocol. Your Highness, I know what you've discovered, he said without preamble. I know you found the access logs showing I read Captain Blackwood's final report, and I know you believe I was part of the conspiracy to cover up his death. Catherine remained silent, letting him continue. I want you to understand what actually happened, Lord Ashford said, his voice heavy with emotion. Yes, I read Blackwood's report the day before he died. Yes, I knew he had discovered information about Lieutenant Webb, and yes, I passed that information up the chain of command as I was required to do, but I did not know they were going to kill him. I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, I believed they would handle the situation through proper channels. Then what did you think would happen? Catherine asked coldly. I thought they would bring Blackwood in, explain Webb's actual role as a double agent, and secure his silence through official means. I thought they would reassign one or both men to eliminate the conflict. I never imagined they would resort to murder. Lord Ashford's hands were shaken. When I learned what had happened, I was horrified. I went to Sir Anthony Hartwell and demanded answers. He told me that Blackwood had proven impossible to control, that he was going to expose Webb regardless of the consequences, and that difficult decisions had been made for the greater good, and you accepted that explanation. Catherine's voice was sharp with disgust. I didn't know what else to do, Lord Ashford admitted. I was told that if I spoke about what I knew, I would be prosecuted under the Official Secrets Act and imprisoned for compromising national security. I was told that revealing the truth would damage the monarchy and endanger ongoing intelligence operations, and I was told that your grandmother had been briefed and had accepted the necessity of maintaining the official story. Catherine stood and walked to the window, her back to Lord Ashford. My grandmother's complicity doesn't excuse yours. A man was murdered, and you chose to protect your position rather than fight for justice. You're right, Lord Ashford said quietly. I've lived with that shame for 10 years. I've tried to tell myself that I was serving the greater good, that I was protecting the institution, but the truth is, I was protecting myself. I was a coward when courage was required. He stood and placed an envelope on Catherine's desk. This is my resignation as private secretary to the Queen. It's effective immediately. I'll also provide a full written statement about everything I know regarding Captain Blackwood's death and the subsequent cover-up. I can't undo my failure, but I can at least stop compounding it with continued silence. Catherine turned to face him. Why now? Why come forward after all these years? Because you're doing what I should have done a decade ago, Lord Ashford replied. You're risking everything to pursue justice. And watching you has shown me how far I've fallen from the principles I once claimed to hold. I'd rather spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends than continue living as the person I've become. After Lord Ashford left, Catherine sat at her desk feeling emotionally drained but also strangely hopeful. The conspiracy was unraveling, with even its participants beginning to crack under the weight of their guilt and her relentless pursuit of the truth. At 4 p.m, Justice Price issued her ruling. The exhumation would be permitted, with the examination to be conducted by an independent pathologist under strict protocols. The judge's written opinion was scathing in its criticism of the government's attempts to hide behind vague national security claims without providing substantive justification. 2 hours later, James Mitchell's story went live on his newspaper's website and would appear in the print edition the following morning. The headline read, Royal Guard murdered by intelligence services. Princess Catherine exposes Decoded cover-up. The article laid out everything Catherine had discovered, complete with copies of Dr. Morrison's photographs, excerpts from Sir Edmund's statement, and quotes from Lord Ashford's resignation letter. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within minutes, the story was trending on social media. News channels interrupted their regular programming to cover the revelations. Members of Parliament began demanding emergency debates. The Prime Minister's office issued a terse statement saying they were looking into the allegations, while the intelligence services issued a denial that fooled no one. Catherine's phone rang constantly with calls from family members, government officials, and journalists. She ignored most of them, but she did accept a call from Thomas Blackwood. Your Highness, I don't know how to thank you, Thomas said, his voice choked with emotion. For 10 years I've lived with doubts and questions, and now finally, the truth is coming out. My brother was a good man who died trying to do the right thing, and now the world will know that. He deserves to be remembered as the hero he was, Catherine replied, and the people who killed him deserve to face justice. I promise you I won't stop until that happens. The exhumation took place 3 days later, in the early morning hours to avoid media circuses. Dr. Helena Price conducted the examination with meticulous care, documenting everything on video and in detailed written notes. Her findings confirmed everything Dr. Morrison had reported. Captain Blackwood had 3 stab wounds to his torso, defensive wounds on his hands and arms, and patterns of injury completely inconsistent with an accidental fall. Her official conclusion was unambiguous. James Blackwood had been murdered. Armed with this physical evidence, along with the testimonies and documents Catherine had gathered, the Crown Prosecution Service had no choice but to open a formal criminal investigation. Sir Anthony Hartwell and Colin Driscoll were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. The intelligence operative who had actually killed Blackwood was identified through old operational records and was arrested in Spain, where he had been living under an assumed name. The political fallout was immense. The Prime Minister ordered a full public inquiry into intelligence service oversight. The head of MI6 resigned. Parliament passed new legislation, strengthening protections for whistleblowers and limiting the use of national security claims to hide potential crimes. The scandal dominated headlines for months and led to reforms that changed how Britain's intelligence services operated. For Catherine, the personal costs were significant. Her relationship with her grandmother became strained, as the Queen struggled to accept that her decision to remain silent had been wrong. Several members of the royal family criticized Catherine publicly for damaging the monarchy's reputation. Security officials warned her that her investigation had made her a target for those who believed she had gone too far, but there were also unexpected rewards. Thomas Blackwood visited her several times, and they developed a genuine friendship based on shared respect and the bond of having fought for justice together. Dr. Morrison lived long enough to see the truth come out, dying peacefully 6 weeks after the exhumation with his conscience finally clear. Sir Edmund Price testified at the trials, finally unburdening himself of a decade of guilt, and Lord Ashford's cooperation provided crucial evidence that helped secure convictions. 6 months after the story first broke, Catherine attended a ceremony at the military cemetery where Captain Blackwood had been buried. His remains had been reinterred with full honors, but this time with the truth about his death publicly acknowledged. A new headstone had been erected, describing him not as a victim of an unfortunate accident but as a loyal guard who had died, fighting corruption and was murdered for his integrity. As Catherine stood before the grave with Thomas Blackwood beside her, she felt a sense of completion. Justice had been slow, and the battle had been difficult, but truth had ultimately prevailed over the lies and secrets that had hidden a good man's murder for too long. Thank you, Thomas said simply, placing flowers on his brother's grave. Thank you for having the courage to fight when it would have been easier to look away. Catherine thought about all the people who had looked away over the years, all the compromises made in the name of national security or institutional protection, all the small surrenders of principle that had allowed one murder to be covered up for a decade, and she thought about what her grandmother had once told her about duty. Before Catherine had learned that duty could sometimes be used to justify terrible things, "Your brother deserved better than what happened to him," Catherine said quietly. "We all deserve a government and institutions that value truth more than convenience, justice more than secrecy. If exposing what happened to him helps create that kind of system, then perhaps his death will have meaning beyond the tragedy of his loss." As she walked away from the cemetery, Catherine knew that her life had been permanently changed by this investigation. She had learned that institutions she had been taught to trust could be corrupted, that people she had been taught to respect could be complicit in terrible things, and that sometimes doing the right thing meant standing alone against powerful forces that wanted truth to remain buried. But she had also learned that truth had power, that ordinary people like Dr. Morrison and Margaret Thornberry could find extraordinary courage when it mattered, and that justice, though delayed, could ultimately prevail if someone was willing to fight for it. Captain James Blackwood had given his life trying to expose corruption and protect the people he served. Catherine had opened his coffin and found not just physical evidence of murder, but a call to action that had changed everything about how she understood power, duty, and truth. In answering that call, she had honored his sacrifice and ensured that his death would not be forgotten or dismissed, but would instead stand as a reminder that some principles are worth fighting for regardless of the cost.